Yeah, I think we're live now. Let me just double check that we are live. Yeah, I think so too. So hello, and good morning. Last week, I did a Facebook Live session for our speaking major lecture. Now, I'll be doing exactly the same thing, but only for the, let's say, first 20 minutes, first 30 minutes of our discussion. So, we're going to talk about the listening subtest for this morning, which is, by the way, exactly the same for all IELTS examinees. So, whether you are going to US, UK, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, applying for Fiance Visa, Spouse Visa, Working Visa, Immigrant Visa, Student Visa, it's exactly the same listening for all of you. Later this afternoon during the reading lecture, that's when we are going to differentiate academic from general training. Now, I also would like to remind you that in the written exams, it's always listening that comes first, followed by reading and then writing. It's just that there are rare instances when reading comes first or writing comes first. And which rare instances are these? Only when there is a technical difficulty in the recording. So please be advised, if ever you'll notice that the test supervisor decided to start with reading or writing, it only means to say that there are issues with the sound system or the recording. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that listening is the easiest of all the subtests. Why? Apparently, number one, you are not required to construct sentences. Number two, you're not required to talk. Number three, all of the answers will be mentioned by the speaker in the recording. Now, I also want you to know that of the 4 subtests, it's only in listening where Filipinos got the high. It's only in listening where Filipinos got higher than 7 as a national average. So for reading, writing, speaking, our average as a country is lower than a 7. Now, listening is divided into 4 sections of varying difficulty. So when we say varying, what exactly do we mean by that? As sections progress, usually the difficulty also increases. So that means to say that the first section is usually the easiest of them all, whereas the 4th section is usually the most challenging. Now, one section is usually composed of 10 points. So if you do the mathematics, 4 sections, 10 points each, grand total of 40 points in the listening subtest. Class, if it's paper-based examination that you are going to take, the test supervisor will give you 30 minutes to listen to the recording and answer the questions at the same time. Later, the test supervisor will give you 10 extra minutes to do 2 things. And what are these? Number 1, review your work. And number 2, transfer the answers to the answer sheet. It's just that if you're taking computer-delivered IELTS, there's no more answer sheet, right? Because basically, you're typing the answers directly on the computer, which means to say no more than extra minutes for you to review your work. So most of the time, the test supervisor only allows the candidates to review your work for 2 minutes and then you move on automatically to the next subtest, which is reading. Now, we've discussed the number of sections and the number of points. That leads us to the next question. What is the passing score in the listening subtest? FYI, IELTS is not a pass or fail examination. It's not as if the moment you get hold of your IELTS result, it says, congratulations, you passed the exam. Or your IELTS result won't tell you, sorry, better luck next time. What is it that your IELTS result will tell you? Here's your score when you took the test. Why? FYI, each country has its own required band scores. Within one country, the passing score varies from one visa to another. Now, let us talk about the different types of visa applications so that you would know what's the target band score. Okay? Any idea which country and which visa prefers the highest band scores? Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a monologue, this is a lecture, so I need your participation. You're not in kindergarten or elementary, so you don't have to raise hands, okay? You just have to open your mouth. So, no right or wrong answer, I just want your participation. Which country do you think usually requires the highest band scores? Okay, I already heard the correct answer, and that is Australia. So the others are saying, ooh. But which visa in Australia in particular? Is it spouse visa, fiance visa, working visa, student visa, or immigrant visa? Any idea? No, it's the immigrant visa. Okay, so my suggestion is you aim for the requirements of Australian visa application so that the moment you get that, you qualify for all visas and you qualify for all countries. FYI, you can use one IELTS result up to 5 countries. Okay? Now, what about the country that requires the lowest band scores? Okay? The truth of the matter is, it is Canada. But I am not saying that all visas in Canada require lower grades. Remember, we're talking about the country and the program that requires the highest. So, for Australian immigrant visa application, that's the one that prefers high band scores. But what about in Australia? It's not as if you won't make it if you only get 6 or 7. But if you get 8 in all subtests of IELTS general training, Australia will reward you with higher immigration points. And what does that mean? The higher the IELTS general training score, the higher the immigration points, more chances that you will be invited to migrate to Australia. Now, what about Canada? Canadian Immigrant Visa Application Provincial Nominee Program, to be specific. So for Provincial Nominee Program, what you need to do is to find a sponsor in Canada. So sponsor could be a family member, could be a super close friend, or an employer who will nominate you to the provincial government of Canada for you to be invited to apply. So, if Australia prefers that you get the higher band scores, Canada accepts as low as CLB 4. What's CLB? Canadian Language Benchmark. Class, CLB 4, what's the equivalent in listening? 4.5. Ladies and gentlemen, with a 4.5 in listening, you can go to Canada. So, what is 4.5 in listening? Well, you can get around 16 to 18 correct answers. That is enough for you to go to Canada via the Provincial Nominee Program. Which means to say, if there are 40 points in listening and you only get 16 to 18 correct answers, even if you commit more mistakes than the correct answers, welcome to Canada. Wow! What about? Hala, maghahanap na ng sponsor yan mamaya. Nasaan ba yung mga kakilala ko sa Canada? Baka pwedeng magpa-sponsor at magpa-nominate. Now, what about reading? CLB4, the equivalent is 3.5. You heard me right? 3.5. So what is 3.5? Maybe 10 to 12 correct answers out of 40 points. So that means to say, even if you sleep in the other half of the subtest, you can qualify for a provincial nominee program. What about writing? CLB4, the equivalent is 4 in writing. What is 4 in writing? The writing task is unfinished. The writing task is not necessarily responsive to the question. There might be an error in every sentence. So, if that is the case, then perhaps it must not be very scary, so to speak, to apply for Canadian Provincial Nominee Program. Class, what about CLB4 in speaking? That's also equivalent to 4.0 in the IELTS. How do you get a 4 in speaking? Class, as I usually mention this as a joke in class, smile lang, sapat na para maka-4 in speaking. But I hope that you don't take me seriously. I mean, you did not pay 11,650 only for you to smile in the speaking subtest, right? You are required to open your mouth and still talk. It's just that a 4 in speaking means short responses. Some of them are not even answering the question. There are not just a few, but plenty of grammatical slips. So ladies and gentlemen, 4.5 in listening, 3.5 in reading, 4 in writing, 4 in speaking. That is enough. That might be enough. I'm using the term might because they're looking at your credentials. Okay, but this is the minimum. That might be enough to qualify for the Provincial Nominee Program of Canadian Immigrant Visa application. So, you see, there is one program that requires higher band scores. There is one program that accepts lower band scores. But someone told me, Sir, what if I get lower than that? Lower than 4.5 in listening, lower than 3.5 in reading, lower than 4 in writing, lower than 4 in speaking. Sabi ko, lower than that? O, eto kutsilyo, te, okay? Magsaksak ka, maglaslas ka, bigti ka, kain kang bubog. Wala nang mas bababa pa dyan. Tapat na po yan. So, I'm just using that for the first part of the discussion to lighten up the mood. Because you know for a fact that you are pressured because you are required to pass an English examination. It's just that you did not come all the way here for you to what? For you to feel some more that you are not meant for this visa application. So, to lighten up the mood, I want everyone to know that learning must be fun. Well, depending on the instructor per se. So, going back, let's talk about the preferred band scores. Okay? So, no such thing as passing score in IELTS, but if you are a healthcare practitioner, say for instance, nurse. How many nurses do I have in this class? May I see? Okay, well, before COVID-19, more than 65% of the reviewees, well, were actually nurses. Until now, it's the case. It's just that nurses are fine with the online review because they can do one-on-one coaching while they're on break in the hospital. That's exactly the reason why online review is for everyone and it's intended for people worldwide because we have one-on-one coaching 24/7. So, if you are a nurse going to UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, your target must be a 7 in listening. But if you're going to the United States of America, US does not care whatever grade you get in listening for as long as your speaking is 7 and your overall band score is 6.5. Now, what about the student visa applicants? May I see the hands of those who are targeting student visa? Okay, for student visa, I need you to ask your school because it's the school that will tell you what's the required band score. More often than not, this is the case. If it's a diploma course, usually 5.5 to 6. If it's bachelor's degree, 6 to 6.5. If it's master's degree, 6.5 to 7. For PhD, usually 7 and above. So remember, for student visa application, what is the first step? You need to find a school. So before you pay the tuition fee, you ask the school first, what's the required band score? Because if the school wants you to get a high band score, that's when you consider other schools that require lower grades in the IELTS. Now, let's move on to the skilled workers. How many skilled workers do we have in class? May I see? Okay, for skilled workers, Usually the butchers, welders, electricians, linemen, mechanics, pipe fitters, cook. It's the employer that tells you what you're supposed to get. Most of the time, 4 to 5 is enough. But there are certain employers that require higher than 5. Now, how many of you are migrating to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, applying for immigrant visa, and applying for immigrant visa, but usually without sponsor to nominate you? May I see? Okay, so it seems to me that no one wants to go there on your own merit. Well, it's much easier to adjust in a new environment if you have someone taking care of you, you have a place for you to stay at, and so on. I am just letting you know that for immigrant visa application without a sponsor, the higher the IELTS score, the higher the immigration points, more chances for you to be invited. Okay, what about fiance visa or spouse visa? Anyone? Pilipinong umahon na naman sa kahirapan? Char! So, I am just letting you know. Kaya nga char, di ba? Gusto niyo babagot yung lecturer niyo? So, going back to fiancé visa and spouse visa, usually 4 will do. So why am I always using the term usually? Because like what I've said, the band score requirements in this examination are not fixed. So, we're done with the 4 sections, the number of points per section, the time allotment, and the usual band score requirements. So, when you check the materials on your IELTS dashboard, there you will find the transmutation table. So when we say transmutation, out of 40 points, when you get 40 over 40, the band score equivalent in IELTS, 9.0. But you will notice there are instances when the band score equivalents that you see are not fixed. Say for instance, sir, how come 7 is 31 to 33? Can they just give us a definite equivalent? Like for 6, can they just tell us if it's 24 or 25 or 26? FYI, the band score equivalents in this examination are not fixed. Why? The easier the material, the band score equivalents are higher. The more difficult the material, the band score equivalents are lower. So that means to say, when you encounter a difficult material in listening, possibly 7 is 31. But if the material is easy, 7 might be adjusted to 32 or 33. So for some people after the examination, they feel down because the material was so difficult. I don't have a chance of getting a 7 anymore. Well, that's good news that it's difficult because they adjust the band score equivalents. Or some people are dangerously overconfident. And after the examination, they say, oh, I am sure to get a minimum of 7 because that was so easy, no-brainer. But they might be surprised when the results comes up. Why? Or how come I only got 6.5? That's because 7 is automatically adjusted. In the same way, 6 is also adjusted. So the reason why you're seeing a range is because band score equivalents are dependent on the level of difficulty. So as I mentioned earlier, listening is the easiest of all the subtests. That's why it usually comes first. Now, in the examination venue though, this is for a paper-based examination, you're arranged alphabetically. Okay? In such a way that in such a way that it's vertical alphabetical, not horizontal alphabetical. So before you enter the venue, kindly check the seat plan. Now, it doesn't mean that just because your surname is, say for instance, Aradanas, it might start with the letter A, but because the second letter is R, there are other surnames that come before Aradanas. So there is a possibility that Aradanas might be seated at the back. So most likely, who's going to occupy the very first chair in front? Someone whose surname is, say for instance, Abad, because ABA usually comes first. Now you're going to ask, sir, may mas mauuna pa ba kay Abad? Say for instance, your surname is Aardvar. Okay? Hi, I'm Ervin Aardvar. Okay? Sure na te, ikaw nasa pinakaunahan. Now, what if your surname is Zacarias? Say for instance, the first letter is Z, but because the second letter is A, there is a possibility that more people will come after you. So even if it's Zacarias, still it's possible you're seated in front, opposite end of the function room or ballroom where the examination is conducted. Now most likely, who is seated at the very last chair over there at the back? Most likely, if your surname is Zuniga. Is there a surname that comes after Zuniga alphabetically? Or say, for instance, your surname is Zygote. Okay? Hi, I'm Ervin Zygote. Okay? Sure natin, ikaw pinaka-dulong-dulo. Now, the question is it possible for you to change seats? The answer is yes. Only during the technical sound check. So, before the actual start of the listening test, the test supervisor will play the recording and will ask you, okay, is this loud enough from where you are? You can maximize this golden opportunity and call the attention of the test supervisor. Excuse me, test supervisor, will you transfer me to a chair beside the speaker? You paid $11,650, $11,990 for this examination, easily wasted in 3 hours. You have all the rights and privileges to request for that during the listening sound check. But the moment listening actual exam starts, no more changing of seats until 12 noon, which is the end of the writing subtest. Okay? Now, let's go back to our discussion of the listening test, why it's the easiest. As I have mentioned, all the answers will be mentioned by the speaker. You don't need to compose sentences. You're not required to write in paragraphs. You're not required to deliver a speech. Now, even the easiest subtest has some challenges. Of course, this is not a giveaway. Meaning to say, there are 2 main barriers in listening. And what are they? Number 1 is accent, and number 2 is speed. So what's accent? This usually pertains to the manner of delivery, and it is usually affected by the native tongue or the regional orientation. Now, may I ask you, in the acronym IELTS, what is the meaning of letter I? Okay, international. Class, some people think that only native accents come out in the IELTS. They think that, okay, IELTS is owned by Cambridge, so for sure it's only British accent that you're going to hear. That's wrong. That is a fallacy. Letter I is an indicator that you will hear native speakers, Americans, Canadians, British, Australians, Irish talking in the recording. But do not be surprised if you hear non-native speakers in the recording who are talking in English. So, for certain recordings, there are Asians, Europeans, but not British, not Irish, or Latinos, Africans, Arabs, talking in English in the listening recording. So that's the point of the letter I, international, meaning to say you hear accents all over the world. Now, let's talk about accent. American, British, Australian, the Kiwi accent of New Zealand, Irish, Canadian. Which one are we Filipinos most familiar with? Why the American accent? Because we're a former American colony. This is the kind of English that we're exposed to since birth. And I bet almost all Filipinos with above average English sound like American, right? It's just that American English might not be the most popular in IELTS, knowing that the people of UK usually label American English as bastardized English. So why bastardized? Whenever I go to UK and I meet locals, they feel bad that Americans decided to tweak their language. Because there are certain terms used only in America, but are not used in the UK. You'll know that it's American English if there are terms like ain't, gonna, whatcha, know what I'm saying, whatchamacallit. So it's just a little unfortunate for us. The accent we are familiar with is the accent that's not so common or not so popular in the recording. Now, if you can tell me, which accent do you think comes out more frequently in the listening subtest? Okay, why the British accent? Because the creator of this examination is Cambridge, based in England. It's just that some people are confused. Okay, so what's the difference between English, British, Scottish, Welsh, Irish? Okay, what's the name of that country? The complete name is United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, some people are confused, Sir, bakit pag nanonood ako minsan ng Miss Universe, iba yung England, iba pa yung Ireland, iba pa yung Wales, iba pa yung Scotland? It's like this. So, England, Wales, and Scotland, the three of them, they're known as Great Britain. Okay? So, when Great Britain merged with Northern Ireland, that's when they became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is the top 1/4 of top 1/5 of Ireland. The lower 4/5 of Ireland is a separate country, which is the Republic of Ireland. Class, like the Filipinos, who are very regionalistic, remember, for most Filipinos, we are usually like this. I'm a proud Bisaya. I'm a proud Kapampangan, proud Ilocano, proud Ilonggo, proud Waray. Exactly the same case in the UK. So sometimes, they don't want to use the term British, but they want to use the term English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Now, speaking of the English accent, this is the one that pertains to the Queen's English. Stiff upper lip with teeth clenched. Now, let's talk of a perfect example of a movie where English accent is used from beginning to end. Harry Potter. Now, I just find it amusing that a decade ago, or maybe it was more than a decade ago, Filipinos would usually get in line. What did I say? Get in line. I did not say fall in line. It is grammatically wrong to write or say fall in line. So what are you supposed to say? Get in line. You follow the cue, but you never fall in line. Okay? We would usually get in line to enter the movie house. But when we are already inside the cinema, watching Harry Potter, how do we look like? Ano daw sabi? Apparently, we don't understand what's going on. But how do we usually appreciate the movie? Not by listening, but by just watching their actions, the movements. Sino po itong batang to? Siya na pala yung bida, si Harry Potter. That's how most Filipinos say it with a hard R. Harry. Now, itong babae ito, sino naman to? Yung barkada niya, si Hermione. But, you might be shocked or surprised when they call each other. It's as if it's an entirely different person. Because when the people in the film call the central character, they say, Mr. Potter. Or, when Harry calls his friend, what is it that he says? Hermione. Or, when the mother of Ron calls him, she usually says, Ron Weasley, hold that car. So you see, this is the problem. Why? We know English, but when there is a barrier, which is the accent, perhaps that's the reason why English examinations are required. At one point in the past, like some 20 years ago, minimum of 16 years, because I've been teaching for 16 years already. So, some 20 years ago, English examinations were not required as part of visa application. It's just that there was this bunch of cabinet makers sent to Australia. And then, the employer told them, "G'day, mate. I need you to come up with 10 cabinets." They make myself clear. The Filipino cabinet makers responded, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." The following day, when the employer came back, "G'day, mate. Where are my 10 cabinets?" "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." They did not understand that we were supposed to make cabinets. It's not as if they don't have the skill. They have the skill for sure. It's just that they did not understand the instruction because of the communication barrier known as accent. Exactly why English examinations are required and are likely here to stay. Because I hear murmurs from people, bakit pa nire-require yung mga English exam na ganyan? You'll only understand it when you are already there. Because people who have been there for the longest time are still having a difficulty in understanding what? Instructions from the British doctors or the Irish supervisors and so on. Now, I also want you to know that later, as part of our discussion, we're going to talk about terms that are used by the locals of these countries. Say, for instance, when you are in Britain, and someone tells you, turn on the telly. We do not use telly in the Philippines, right? But telly is actually our television. Or, when you go there and you hear someone say, "Can I have the broly?" What's broly? Any idea? What's broly? Sabi ko ni Sir, broccoli ba yun, sir? Ay, hindi te. Umbrella. Okay? So, part of our discussion later, which I won't be doing on Facebook Live anymore, because this is just for free. Speaking of, how many audience do I have? I have 320 right now. So, as I was saying, this is how it's done in the listening lecture. Okay? Do not expect that we're going to talk about, class, what is a noun? What is a verb? That's not the way to do it. We talk about test-taking strategies that will help you in the examination. Or, the Scottish people have certain terms that we might not understand. Say, for instance, I didn't get what you're talking about. What did I say? I didn't get what you're talking about. Idinikin? I don't know. But you're talking about what you're talking about. So you need to be exposed to something like that prior to the examination. And that's what this review center is for. If your review center is not teaching you that, you might not be in the right place. Okay? Now, you know a lot of Americans. That's why we're familiar with how they talk. We know a lot of British. But what about Australians? Class, we have limited exposure to Australians. That's why we're not entirely familiar with how they talk. But I need you to know, Aussies are fond of shortcuts. So, instead of saying good day, they usually say g'day. Right? Instead of saying mate, they usually say might. It's just that they have other terms that might also come out in the listening subtest. Say, for instance, if you've been doing practices in listening for the longest time, you will know that time is usually a required answer in listening. Like, what time is it now? It's 10 a.m. But sometimes in the recording, the first speaker said, "Excuse me, what time is it now?" The other speaker says, "One moment. It's 5:30 in the afternoon." Okay, so what's the time according to the speaker? 5:30 a.m. or 5:30 p.m.? It's 5:30 in the afternoon. Arvo, A-R-V-O, is the Australian slang for afternoon. Ah, ganun pala yun, son. Kaya ka magbabayad ng 4,000 only for life, di ba? Para ituro sa'yo ang mga bagay-bagay na hindi mo malalaman on your own. So don't be like the 60 to 70% of the Filipinos who just take the examination without preparation. Listening lang yan. Nung kumuha na ng exam, you just could die. So, 5:30 the other, 5:30 p.m. So don't expect that all the time the speakers are going to say AM or PM or morning or afternoon. Okay? Class, what about New Zealand? Yes, we're exposed to a lot of Americans, a handful of Brits, a few Aussies. But what about New Zealand? Will you please tell me, for you, who is the most popular person from New Zealand? Anyone? Okay. Yes, I heard someone say it right. Aquaman is actually from New Zealand. Okay? It's just that. How come the others were not able to respond? Because of the lack of exposure to people of New Zealand. So how exactly do they talk? How different is this from Australian, British, American? Class, we send students to New Zealand. That's why I usually coordinate with Maura, our counterpart based in Auckland, New Zealand. So when we talk over the phone, I noticed this is how she mentions certain countries in Europe. And I need you to be all ears on this one because later I will ask you to tell me which countries she's pertaining to. Okay? Let's begin. The first one, Denmark. Teka lang. Let me finish first, okay? I'll be mentioning 3 countries. Number 2, Finland. And number 3, Czech Republic. Okay, one by one. Denmark is our Denmark, right? Okay. Finland is our Finland. Czech Republic is our Czech Republic. So what did you notice? Usually they interchange I and E. E becomes I becomes E. So if that is the case, paano ang bike? Naging Becky ang bike sa New Zealand, diba? Because I becomes E becomes I. So, a lot of people claim that they're good in teaching English. But not a lot of people are able to deliver well in front of a class and are able to hold the attention of the class from beginning to end without looking at any piece of paper, without relying on PowerPoint presentation. That's why not all reviewers are equal. There's what we call someone who belongs to the upper echelon or the upper echelon. Now, going back to what I was saying, problem number 1 is accent. What about problem number 2? Speed. Speed in the context of what? Sometimes, number 1, some speakers talk too fast. It might be difficult to catch up with what they're saying. Or, number 2, sometimes they don't talk too fast. But sometimes, they give the answers one after another. Now, knowing that accent and speed are the main barriers in listening, let's begin with the best strategy. The best remedy before we focus on the test-taking techniques, the tips and tricks. So, exposure is the key. If you're not exposed, how will you know? So how do you expose yourself? By frequently listening to American, British, Australian shows, movies. You are fortunate that we have the internet now. Because you just connect to the internet and you have what? A wide array, a very diverse source of materials where you can expose yourself. Now, you really don't need to do listening tests all the time just to improve your listening skill. It's just a matter of listening to all sorts of accents, such that when you encounter it the next time around, when you hear someone saying H, oh, so this is how other nationalities say H. Not H, but H. Or what about the letter Z? Speakers and listening are fond of spelling out. So sometimes it's not Z, it's Z or Z. Now, I'm sure that we are busy people. Who isn't busy, right? We have a lot of things to do in life. So what exactly do I need you to do? Multitasking. Say for instance, when you are cooking, your background music must be listening test 1. This is a practice listening test which resembles the International English Language Testing System. Or, say for instance, you are doing the laundry. Don't just do the laundry. Your background music must be section 1. You will hear a number of different recordings and you'll have to answer questions on what you hear. They'll be taught to read the instructions. You get my point? Why? If you do not want to look at something, all you have to do is close your eyes. Why? Because we have eyelids. You don't want to see something, you cannot see it anymore because you have eyelids for that matter. But if you do not want to listen to something or hear something, you have no choice, but you're going to hear it because we don't have earlids to do that. Say for instance, you're inside a public utility vehicle. Say for instance, bus, jeepney, FX. The driver prefers rock music, but you hate rock music. You don't have a choice because you're not the one who controls the radio, say for instance. That's actually my point, why I'm saying it's a matter of exposing yourself, and it starts from there. Familiarity bridges the gap, and everything else will follow. So that was just the introduction. For the next part, we're going to talk about what to do, what not to do before, during, and after the exam, the correct format, how you're not supposed to write the answer, and then the tips that will help you get a 9 in listening. We're not happy with 8.5 in listening. If you can get a 9 in listening, it's not as if you can easily announce to the whole wide world, hey, I am a 9er because I got 9 in one subtest of the IELTS. And then your friend will tell you, ay, hindi mo naman, naka-9 ka. Sa anong subtest? Pakialam mo kung listening, basta may 9 ako. So, it's much easier to get a 9 in listening as compared to the other subtests. That's why. Why be happy with an 8.5 or 8 when you can get the highest possible grade in the easiest subtest? So that wraps up the free discussion as we focus on the paid content. Okay? Bye!